Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, Munich, victory without bloodshed. This is the sound of war. It is an air raid signal. It was heard in Danzig on September 1st, 1939. 2 days later, it was heard in London, Paris, and Berlin. And before many months would go by, this strange sound would be heard in strange places with strange-sounding names. Names like Koblenz, Essen, Louvain, and Timor. In every part of the globe, in every hour of the day, it is the sound of war. Technically, World War II had an official beginning. This was on September 1st, 1939, when German panzer divisions moved across the Polish border. To many, though, the war began 4 years earlier. It is October 3rd, 1935, the place Northeast Africa. The situation: Italian armies, based in Italian Eritrea, move across the borders of one of the oldest Christian nations in the world, Ethiopia. Il Duce, Mussolini, has an old score to settle with the Ethiopians dating back to 1896. Then Italian troops were massacred at Adawa in an ill-fated attempt to conquer Ethiopia. Then it was men against men. Now it was men against steel. The Italians had the steel. The League of Nations, without United States participation, acted quickly. They condemned the invasion and voted economic sanctions against Italy. It proved ineffective. The great experiment had failed. The theory of international law was put to shame. In Rome in May of 1936, Mussolini spoke to the Italian people.
The Duce has told them that the war is over. And now they will go back to their homes, and they will realize that in 7 months, Italy has accomplished one of the greatest military feats known in history. You hear now the band in the square playing, and the people are still calling him, and the balcony is still lighted, and he will appear again. Yes, he has just appeared at this moment, standing on the balcony, this lonely figure of a man who has led 34 million to this colossal victory in spite of sanctions, in spite of the hostility of the world.
Mussolini said, "In 7 months, we have accomplished one of the greatest military feats in history." A recapitulation of the strength of the warring nations. Attacking for Italy 250,000 well-trained troops with 150,000 in reserve. Defending for Ethiopia, less than 50,000 tribesmen. Attacking for Italy, a combined juggernaut of tanks, artillery, and planes. Defending for Ethiopia, half-naked natives with ancient muskets, swords, and spears. Italy had accomplished one of the great military feats of history. World collective security was now a memory. A new word had entered the international language: appeasement. It is March 1938. A heavily armed Germany has become one of the most powerful nations in the world. Under Chancellor Adolf Hitler, they mobilize. In the spring of 1938, they strike. That was Chancellor Adolf Hitler. He is speaking at Nuremberg. He attacks the League of Nations. He attacks France and Great Britain. He attacks all the democracies of the world. Now, 2 years after occupying the Rhineland without bloodshed, he looks to Austria. Chancellor von Schuschnigg of Austria visits the Führer at Berchtesgaden. The Führer says, "How have you dared all these years suppress and torture my people, my German people in Austria?" Schuschnigg listens. German armies are mobilized on their border. Hitler shows Schuschnigg the plan for the German attack. Schuschnigg speaks by radio to the Austrian people. When he finishes, he is weeping. He has told them that Austria is to become part of Germany. It is May 1938. Hitler is now looking south to the democracy of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia, a product of the peace of World War I, a conglomeration of many speaking minority groups, living in the now united provinces of Bohemia, Moravia, and Austria, Silesia, and the Hungarian provinces of Slovakia and Ruthenia. Czechoslovakia, led by the world-revered Thomas Masaryk and Edward Benish, a country of 14 million Czechs, Slovaks, Magyars, Ruthenians, Poles, Jews, and 750,000 unhappy Germans. The Germans of the Sudetenland. Hitler sees his opportunity. He speaks to the Reichstag. Now in May, 2 Germans are killed along the Czech-German border. Hitler again speaks. "We must save our German brothers in the Sudetenland," he says. "These conditions can no longer be tolerated." He tells the Sudetenland Germans they can now count upon the Führer and Germany for their protection. He sends German troops to the Czechoslovakian border. The Czechs are of strong heart. They are the most powerful small nation in Europe. They have a standing army of close to 200,000 with more than 1 million men in the trained reserve. They are not afraid. The Czechs are also strong in diplomacy. If attacked, France by treaty is obligated to come to their aid. Great Britain, by tradition, would march with France. Russia would also oppose the German armies. Hitler withdraws his troops. The withdrawal is temporary. At the end of May 1938, he tells his generals, "We will smash Czechoslovakia by force in the near future." He sets October 1st for Operation Green, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. Now the 4 summer months of 1938. The Chancellor screams his hate at the Czechs. Said Adolf Hitler, "These atrocities must cease. Czechoslovakia must renounce all its foreign alliances. A Nazi state must be established inside Czechoslovakia." France and Great Britain watched. One major voice cried out the alarm. A member of Great Britain's House of Commons. His name, Now it was done. It was left for Czechoslovakian Premier General Sirovi to speak to his people. Said the Premier, "I am passing through the gravest hour of my life, for I am doing the hardest thing which it has ever fallen to my lot to do. And it would be easier to die than to do. But we were deserted, and we stood alone." The Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you Munich, Victory Without Bloodshed. The actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic era of the 20th century. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, the war begins. It is September 1st, 1939. Chancellor Adolf Hitler is broadcasting to the German nation and the world. It is 10 a.m. In London, Prime Minister Chamberlain of Great Britain is listening. In 2 days, he will be speaking to the British Empire and the world. World War II is about to get underway. A brief recapitulation of the events leading up to this moment. 11 months earlier in Munich, Chamberlain, Chancellor Adolf Hitler of Germany, Premier Benito Mussolini of Italy, and Premier Edouard Daladier of France signed the pact that sealed the death of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain believed it to be peace in our time.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
Adolf Hitler, it was as Winston Churchill had prophesied. The first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup that will be proffered to us year by year. 6 months after Munich, Czechoslovakia became a German protectorate. Now Adolf Hitler was looking east to Poland. That within the decisive year that followed Munich would earn first the scorn, then the respect of the free world. Poland, a scavenger nation, grabbing land from helpless Czechoslovakia after Munich under the approving eye of Chancellor Hitler. Poland, next on Hitler's timetable of world domination. The mistakes of Munich had now been realized. On March 31st, 1939, Prime Minister Chamberlain spoke to Parliament. Said the Prime Minister, "I now have to inform the House that in the event of any action which clearly threatened Polish independence, in which the Polish government considered it vital to resist with their national forces, His Majesty's government would feel themselves bound at once to lend the Polish government all support in their power."
in their complete disregard of the principles laid down by the German government itself, seem to fall into a different category. And they must cause us all to be asking ourselves, is this the end of an old adventure, or is it the beginning of the new? Is this the last attack upon a small state, or is it to be followed by others?
March 31st, 1939. The day the line was drawn. For Chamberlain, it was a remembrance of the lines, "In the darkest night of the year, when the stars have all gone out, courage is better than fear. Faith is truer than doubt." England would be pushed no further. Whatever the cost, they would march with Poland. Now the bargaining for alliances began. Both Great Britain and Germany looked east to Russia. Russia, massive, silent Russia. A natural ideological enemy of Nazism and fascism. Russia, for years heaping verbal abuse on Hitler in retaliation for the tirades centered upon them by Nazi leaders. But international politics creates strange bedfellows, influenced in the main by boundaries and self-aspiration.
Nicht nach Deutschland exportieren gedenkt. Im selben Augenblick sehe ich keine Veranlassung mehr, dass wir auch nur einmal gegeneinander Stellung nehmen sollen.
I see no reason, says Mr. Hitler, why Russia and Germany should have been enemies any longer.
To Germany, Russia stood as an unwanted Eastern opponent if Great Britain and France marched with Poland. It was only 20 years before that Kaiser Wilhelm II found himself locked between the Russian and Western fronts, the prelude to Germany's World War I defeat. To Great Britain and France, it was time for mending fences. Russia had been prepared to march with them 6 months before at Munich. Today their moves were in doubt. Winston Churchill speaks.
I cannot forecast you the action of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. But perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest.
Straws in the wind. On April 4th, Hitler issues secret orders for Operation White, the invasion of Poland. At the same time, his speeches become conciliatory towards the Soviet Union. On August 3rd, Hitler in a major speech says he is now ready to remold German-Russian relations. On August 10th, a British and French mission arrives in Moscow. They are treated with courtesy. They receive no commitments. The month is filled with tension. There is no indication which way the Soviet Union will go. Finally, on August 23rd...
Here is a bulletin from the United Press. Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact today. The agreement provides that the two countries would not resort to war against one another and would not support any nation that attacked either of the two countries.
So it was done. The electioneering was over. The decision was in. Germany had won over Russia. France and Great Britain would have no Eastern ally. For the Western allies, time was now the most important factor. Unbeknownst to them, Operation White, invasion of Poland, had already been planned. From Great Britain, Thomas Masaryk, Czechoslovakian ambassador to Great Britain, bitterly spoke.
No
knows what is going to happen within the next 24 or 48 hours. I don't think that either Chamberlain or Hitler really know at this minute. But one thing is very definitely sure. If the war starts, it will be Hitler who is the guilty party. I do not wish to deny that the unbelievable policy of the Western democracies has helped Hitler to this fortunate or tragic position. History will prove that most efficiently and conclusively. But I do not think I am too optimistic when I say that these democracies have definitely learned their lesson. It is the terrible tragedy of my little country that it had to be crucified.
August 25th, Prime Minister Chamberlain wrote to Chancellor Hitler. Said Chamberlain, the announcement of the Russian-German agreement has been taken in some quarters in Berlin as indication that intervention by Great Britain in behalf of Poland is no longer a contingency that need be reckoned with. No greater mistake could be made. Nothing can alter Great Britain's obligation to Poland. August 31st, Chancellor Hitler issued Directive Number 1 for the conduct of the war. Fall Weiss, translation Case White, further translation, the invasion of Poland. It is September 1st, 1939. At 5:45 a.m., German armies move across the Polish borders and converge upon the capital city of Warsaw from the north, south, and west. It is now 10 a.m., 4 hours and 15 minutes since the start of the attack. In Berlin, the Council of Ministers of the German Reichstag have been assembled. The reason, an emergency session. The Führer will speak. Hitler is speaking. The translation you will hear is taking place on September 1st, 1939. You will hear two interruptions of the Hitler speech when a news commentator, Bob Trout, takes the air for two important news flashes.
Wenn Polen versuchen sollte, auf dem Weg zollpolitischer Maßnahmen Danzig wirtschaftlich zu vernichten, dass dann Deutschland nicht mehr länger untätig zusehen könnte.
I told the Polish ambassador 3 weeks ago that if the situation continued as it was, if Danzig were persecuted and it were attempted by Poland to ruin Danzig economically, the situation could not be tolerated.
In Berlin, as Hitler spoke, there was an amazing reaction from the populace. The day was gray and the clouds low in the sky. Unlike a similar day in 1914, there were no joyous crowds following behind the brass bands that kept time for the iron-helmeted troopers of the Kaiser. Then the Wehrmacht marched to glory and the people followed. Now they marched alone. The people of Germany were shocked. The day had finally come. This was not Austria. This was not the Sudetenland. This was not Munich. Today the troops had finally marched. They prayed that Hitler's hand would not be called. Nevertheless, the sound of the airplane motors made them look to the skies.
We interrupt this broadcast of Adolf Hitler's speech just momentarily to report a dispatch from Paris which says that Premier Bloodshed of France has now called the French Council of Ministers for an emergency meeting which is to take place just 10 minutes from now at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Ich habe mich daher nun entschlossen, mit Polen in der gleichen Sprache zu reden, mit der Polen und der Polen.
I therefore resolve to speak to Poland in the same language in which Poland has addressed us for such a long time.
Sie wissen, dass Russland und Deutschland von zwei verschiedenen
Chancellor Hitler put Directive Number 1 for the conduct of the war into effect shortly after midday Thursday, August 31st. At about the same time, he sent a telegram to Edward, the Duke of Windsor, the former British monarch. The telegram read, "Thank you for your telegram of August 27th. You may rest assured that my attitude toward Britain and my desire to avoid another war between our peoples remain unchanged. It depends on Britain, however, whether my wishes for the future development of German-British relations can be realized."
Es war nur eine Frage, die geklärt werden musste.
Once again, we interrupt very briefly this talk by Chancellor Hitler to announce that in London, Parliament has been summoned to meet at 6 p.m. in London, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time today.
Polen hat heute Nacht zum ersten Mal auf unserem eigenen Territorium auch mit bereits regulären Soldaten geschossen.
Poland, for the first time this evening, has shot at regular soldiers upon our territory.
Und von jetzt ab wird Bombe mit Bombe vergolten.
From now on, bomb will be met by bomb.
Hitler said, "From now on, bombs will be met with bombs." It has been historically proven that the attack Hitler charged the Poles made on the German border was another unbelievable lie. The soldiers making the attack were members of the elite German SS troops in Polish uniforms. The German attack against Germans, in effect, was Hitler's justification for starting World War II. You are listening to Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring, second in command to Adolf Hitler, Commander-in-Chief of the German Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, former air ace of World War I, and last leader of the famed Richthofen Squadron. Hermann Göring, Prussian police chief, chairman of the Council of Ministers, president of the Reichstag. Hermann Göring, organizer of the Nazi concentration camps.
Mein Führer.
General Göring is addressing the Führer.
Steht in dieser geschichtlichen Stunde entschlossen und einmütig hinter dem Führer.
The German people stand behind the Führer.
Den Willen des deutschen Volkes für die Ehre und Zukunft der Nation und des Reiches. Jedes, aber auch jedes Opfer zu bringen.
We are determined to bring every sacrifice for the honor of the German people.
Dem Führer blinde Treue und Gehorsam. In jeder Not und in jeder Gefahr. Die einzelnen Mitglieder
Every danger we shall stand to the Führer.
werden auf allen Plätzen, auf die sie gestellt sind, oder als Soldaten, ihre Pflicht bis zum Äußersten erfüllen.
We expect of you to do your duties to the utmost as soldiers and as civilians.
Überzeugung vom endgültigen Sieg.
Sieg Heil to the Führer. Reichstag is present singing the German national anthem. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. This will be followed by the Horst Wessel song.
peace move quickly. Premier Mussolini of Italy, as he did the year before at Munich, called for a conference in the name of peace. France grabbed at the straw. Great Britain was ready to march. They attached to the conditions of a conference a proposal they knew Germany could not fulfill. The British will parley if Germany returns its troops to their own borders. In the United States, Americans, through the medium of radio, had for the first time kept abreast minute by minute of the momentous events taking place. Now it finally had come. That evening, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke to the American people.
My countrymen and my friends, tonight my single duty is to speak to the whole of America. This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. Even a neutral has a right to take account of facts. Even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or close his conscience.
After the president's speech, the bulletins of the great drama crackled over the ocean on a minute-by-minute basis. Americans were just beginning their long Labor Day weekend. In between the announcements cautioning motorists against the highway dangers came the ominous reports from overseas. Saturday came, and once again the behind-the-scenes maneuvering. But there was no turning back. On the evening of September 2nd, Prime Minister Chamberlain spoke to a hostile House of Commons. No reply had been received from Hitler to their ultimatum of a day before, that German troops must be withdrawn from Poland. France wanted a further delay, 48 hours before they would march. The House of Commons would have none of that. The ancient thrilling cry of "Speak for England" resounded through the chamber that heard the likes of Pitt, Disraeli, and Lloyd George. Of September 2nd wore on. German troops were now well into Polish territory. Soldiers and civilians were victims of the Nazi onslaught. The British and French cabinets continued to meet. Lines were still open between London, Paris, and Berlin. Meanwhile, the war was on. There was misery and death reigning upon the Poles and the Polish nation. The Polish ambassador,
willing to negotiate. We are willing to make concessions for the sake of peace. But what no nation can do to prevent war, what no free government can do, is to deliver its people into slavery for the sake of temporary peace. We shall fight this war for Poland, for the sanctity of our home, for the right to maintain our faith and our traditions. But we shall also fight to remove from Europe the specter of force and intimidation, to assure to the free nations of the world the right to enjoy freedom and independence, the right to pursue the happiness in such a way as they themselves think fit.
It is ironical that the epitaph of the appeasement policy over Austria, over the Sudetenland, and over Czechoslovakia should have been written more than a decade before. Then it was written, "Every nation that once submits to a foreign demand has lost part of its power to resist. Each time it makes a concession, it is less able and less willing to resist the next demand." That is why the shrewd victor will always ask what he wants by degrees. Once a nation has begun to give rather than fight, it will keep on giving, provided only that the victor nation does not ask for too much. The name of the book, My Struggle. The author, Adolf Hitler. World War II had begun. And now it was time. It must be written that after all the mistakes of peaceful policy against the aggressor have been analyzed for better or for worse, that after all the misused opportunity to stop the tyrant had been dissected, it was to the everlasting glory of man that in the hour of peril he responded to the ancestral cry, duty to God, duty to country. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you The War Begins, the actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic era of the 20th century. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, Poland in misery.
I am speaking to you from the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government...
It is September 3rd, 1939. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain is broadcasting to the British Empire and the world. It is the climax of 3 days of drama that will have its conclusion exactly 6 years later. This is the beginning of World War II. A brief recapitulation of the events leading up to this moment. 2 days earlier, on September 1st at 5:45 a.m., German armies moved across the Polish borders from the north, south, and west. 4 hours and 15 minutes after the attack, Chancellor Adolf Hitler spoke to the Council of Ministers of the Reichstag.
Wenn Polen versuchen sollte, auf dem Weg zollpolitischer Maßnahmen Danzig wirtschaftlich zu vernichten, dass dann Deutschland nicht mehr länger untätig zusehen könnte.
I told the Polish ambassador 3 weeks ago that if situation continued as it was, if Danzig were persecuted and it were attempted by Poland to ruin Danzig economically, the situation could not be tolerated.
German armies moved quickly through Poland. Throughout September 1st, France and Great Britain did not move. Emergency sessions were being held in Paris and London. The two allies would march unless Germany withdrew its troops from Poland.
And now, here's a special bulletin from the Associated Press. Paris. The French government announced today that Robert Colondre, French ambassador to Berlin, would call on Joachim von Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, at noon, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 a.m. New York time, today to demand a reply to France's ultimatum for the withdrawal of German troops from Poland. This French action was order taken just 3 hours after Sir Neville Henderson, the British ambassador to Berlin, had informed the German government at 4 a.m. New York time that a state of war would exist between Britain and Germany as of 6 a.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time, unless Germany gave a satisfactory reply.
It is Sunday, September 3rd, 1939. The day is cool and clear in London, and the citizens of the city and the island would normally be quietly returning from church. There is more movement than usual. At 11:15 a.m., Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain will speak to the Empire and the world. It is now 2 days, 5.5 hours since the German attack on Poland. Many Polish soldiers and civilians have been killed. Much territory has been captured by the Germans. Much destruction has fallen upon Polish cities. Great Britain and France are ready to march. For Prime Minister Chamberlain, it is an unbelievable nightmare. Less than 1 year before, upon returning from his second of 3 trips to Chancellor Adolf Hitler's headquarters, he was one of those mainly responsible for the destruction of the Czechoslovakian nation by adhering to the British and French policy. Now Germany had moved against Poland, and Great Britain must honor its ties with the Polish nation. The declaration of war speech he made has rarely been heard in its entirety. All the disillusion, humiliation, and defeat can be heard in his voice as he speaks.
This is London. You will now hear a statement by the Prime Minister. I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed. Yet I cannot believe that there is anything more or anything different that I could have done and that would have been more successful. Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honorable settlement between Germany and Poland. But Hitler would not have it. He had evidently made up his mind to attack Poland whatever happened. And although he now says he put forward reasonable proposals which were rejected by the Poles, that is not a true statement. The proposals were never shown to the Poles, nor to us. And though they were announced in the German broadcast on Thursday night, Hitler did not wait to hear comments on them, but ordered his troops to cross the Polish frontier the next morning. His action shows convincingly that there is no chance of expecting that this man will ever give up his practice of using force to gain his will. He can only be stopped by force. And we and France are today, in fulfillment of our obligations, going to the aid of Poland, who is so bravely resisting this wicked and unprovoked attack upon her people. We have a clear conscience. We have done all that any country could do to establish peace. But a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, had become intolerable. And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage. At such a moment as this, the assurances of support which we have received from the Empire are a source of profound encouragement to us. When I finish speaking, certain detailed announcements will be made on behalf of the government. Give these your close attention. Now, may God bless you all, and may He defend the right. For it is evil things that we shall be fighting against. Brute force, bad faith, injustice, oppression, and persecution. And against them I am certain that the right will prevail.
It shall ever be to Prime Minister Chamberlain's credit that he did his duty as he saw fit. Winston Churchill would say 14 months later in memoriam, "The only guide to a man is his conscience. The only shield to his memory is the rectitude and sincerity of his actions." Whatever else history may or may not say about these terrible, tremendous years, we can be sure that Neville Chamberlain acted with perfect sincerity and authority. And we here assembled this morning, members of all parties without single exception, feel that we do ourselves and our country honor in saluting the memory of one whom Disraeli would have called an English worthy. The war is on. The British monarch, George VI, speaks to the Empire.
But it has been in vain. It has been forced. The challenge of a principle fatal to any civilized order in the world.
The war was underway. With its beginning came a new form of communication, the radio war correspondent. In all previous history, war was reported by writers, and the history of the conflict as we know it was left for us in the written word. Now through radio came the spoken word, and news as it happened was communicated to every home. One of the best-known news commentators was later to become head of the United States Office of War Information. His name, Elmer Davis. He was at his post as Prime Minister Chamberlain and King George spoke.
We have Hitler's statement that it strongly implies that he intends to stand on the defense in the West. His troops are invading Poland. It would be very difficult at present, as our military experts have told you, for the French and British to give any effective aid to Poland, except possibly by air. And there, Hitler has announced that he will bomb only military objectives, although dispatches from Poland indicate that many civilians have been killed and wounded in the air operations, and it will be difficult for the British and French to make any attacks on Germany without immediately provoking reprisals, in which each side will undoubtedly accuse the other of having been the first to attack women and children. The tone of Mr. Chamberlain was that of a very tired and very saddened man. Clear up till yesterday, it looked as if he might make greater sacrifices for the sake of peace, as if there might be some possible concession this time, as there had been the time before. And you will remember that yesterday it was Mr. Greenwood, the leader of the opposition, who got the cheers in the House of Commons when he rose to speak, and cries of "Speak for England."
The German armies moved across Poland, a combination of might and power unseen and unheard of in all previous military history. A new word entered the language of war: Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Gone were the static, unmoving lines of trench warfare. In its stead was the awesome power of the mechanized army: tanks, motorized artillery, armored cars, and the terrible new weapon of destruction, the dive bomber. The Poles were being annihilated. It is September 17th, 1939. Now more terrible news for the Poles. Russia invaded Poland from the east. Now the squeeze began. Within 2 days, the Russian armies, with little opposition, took over half of Poland. The Poles were of strong heart. They fought well for their homeland, but they were no match for the onrushing waves of mechanized might. France and Great Britain could not effectively come to their aid. Before 1 month would go by, Chancellor Adolf Hitler would make a victory speech.
Truppen auf einer großen Linie, Brest, Lemberg und nordwärts. Und in diesem Augenblick marschieren gerade seit gestern Nachmittag endlose Kolonnen der zusammengeschlagenen polnischen Armee aus dem Raum von Kutno als Gefangene ab.
Today, there are thousands of columns proceeding along the border which our troops have reached, by Kutno, by Lemberg, and by Brest-Litovsk. And these troops are now retreating from the regions from which they have been captured.
70.000, ich weiß nicht, wie groß die Zahl jetzt ist, aber nur das eine weiß ich, was von dieser polnischen Armee westlich dieser Linie steht, wird in wenigen Tagen kapitulieren, die Waffen strecken oder zerschlagen werden.
I do not know how many captives have been made, but I do know one thing, and that is that in a very few days, those remaining in Poland in the army will capitulate, will lay down their weapons, and will also be taken captive.
Staat von 36 Millionen Einwohnern. Und diese militärische Stärke in 4 Wochen restlos vernichtet wird. Und wenn in dieser ganzen Zeit für den Sieger nicht ein einziger Rückschlag eintritt, dann kann man darin nicht die Gnade eines besonderen Glücks sehen, sondern den Nachweis höchster Ausbildung, bester Führung und todesmutigster Tapferkeit.
He has just said that when we succeeded in conquering a state of 36 million inhabitants in 1 month without any defeat, then that is not only luck, but our wonderful accomplishment in the field of military campaign.
The war was a strange one. There were still signs of the chivalry of years gone by. Both German and Allied gunners seemed reluctant to hit the enemy. Artillerymen in both the Maginot and Siegfried lines conspicuously avoided the pinpoint accuracy science had afforded their weapons. There was not a British casualty until 3 months and 9 days after the war began. An ironical note. Years later, at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel said, "If the French had attacked us during the Polish campaign, we would not have had a real defense. To attack Poland, we had to leave the western borders unattended. The French could have crossed the Rhine with no opposition." Though the military action was slow, Great Britain made preparations for the eventual death and destruction that would soon rain upon them. The children of the Empire were evacuated to the United States and other countries of the Empire. As Christmas 1939 neared, families were reunited by transatlantic telephone calls.
Hello, Mom. Hello, Dad. How are you? Fine, thanks. How are you? I hope you're having a Merry Christmas. This is Violet. Yes. Come on now, don't be silly now.
Just a moment. Mrs. Dollop, just a moment. We'll have Violet for you in just a minute. Here's Ronnie. Here's Ronnie who wants to add a word, and then we'll come back to Violet.
Hi, Mom. Hello, Tom. How are you? I'm going to cry.
In the home island, the royal family stood as the symbol of strength and courage. They would share the dangers that would confront all their subjects. A princess, later to become queen, spoke to the children of the empire. Princess Elizabeth.
I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
The year was coming to a close. Total war would soon plunge the world into terrible agony. For the conquered Poles, there was death, misery, and destruction. Poland was in torment. Winston Churchill would salute the gallant Poles.
Our thoughts go out tonight, not only to those valiant exiled Poles whom we have learned to like and respect in the British Islands, and who stand armed in the ranks of the armies of liberation, but even more to those who are gripped at home in the merciless oppression of the Hun. All over Europe, races and states whose culture and history made them a part of the general life of Christendom in centuries when the Prussians were no better than a barbarous tribe, and the German Empire no more than an agglomeration of pumpernickel principalities, are now prostrate under the dark, cruel yoke of Hitler and his Nazi gang. The atrocities committed by Hitler upon the Poles, the ravaging of their country, the scattering of their homes, the affronts to their religion, the enslavement of their manpower, exceed in severity and in scale the villainies perpetrated by Hitler in any other conquered land. It is to you, Poles in Poland, who bear the full brunt of the Nazi oppression, that the hearts of the British and American democracies go out in a full and generous tide. We send you our message of hope and encouragement tonight, knowing that the Poles will never despair, and that the soul of Poland will remain unconquerable. This war
against the mechanized barbarians who, slave-hearted themselves, are fitted only to carry their curse to others. This war will be long and hard, but the end is sure. The end will reward all toil, all disappointment, all suffering in those who faithfully serve the cause of European and world freedom. A day will dawn, perhaps sooner than we now have a right to hope, when the insane attempt to found a Prussian domination on racial hatred, on the armored vehicle, on the secret police, on the alien overseer, and on still more filthy quislings will pass like a monstrous dream. And in that morning of hope and freedom, not only the embattled and at last well-armed democracies, but all that is noble and fearless in the new world as well as in the old will salute the rise of Poland to be a nation once again.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you Poland in Misery, the actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, Sitzkrieg, the Phoney War.
Frankfurt war und ist eine deutsche Stadt.
Danzig was and is a German city.
Alle diese Gebiete verdanken.
You are listening to Adolf Hitler. He is speaking in Berlin. It is less than 30 days since German Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders on September 1st. Hitler's legions had introduced a new word in the language of warfare. Blitzkrieg, lightning warfare. It is now September 29th. 12 days before, Russian armies, adhering to the terms of the Moscow Pact, signed 8 days before the German attack on Poland, moved across Polish borders from the east. The squeeze was on. Poland was gone. Now Russia looked to the Baltic states. On the day of the signing of the Polish peace treaty, Russia forced Estonia to permit the Soviet military machine to establish bases on Estonian soil. Similar treaties were signed within 2 weeks with Latvia and Lithuania. But what about Finland? Independent, freedom-loving Finland. Finland, a land of 65,000 lakes, of white-covered lands. Finland, a picturesque Christmas card inhabited by strong men of goodwill, of courage. Russia, Finland was strategically situated. The great city of Leningrad was only 20 miles from the Finnish border. The Russians made demands. They wanted the Finns to relinquish territory on the Russian border near Leningrad so that the Russian bastion would be beyond effective military range of an enemy. The Finns, to preserve their peace, agreed. But Russia asked for more. They wanted to establish military bases on Finnish soil. The Finns stood firm. They would not give up their land for foreign use. The Russians demanded the Finns retire from the Russian-Finnish border. Finland refused to pull back its troops until the Russians did the same. On November 30th, Russia invaded Finland. $100,000 Russian troops moved across the Finnish borders. World attention moved from France, Germany, and Great Britain to the lands and waters of Finland. New names became known in every home. Helsinki, Finland's capital city. The Mannerheim Line, a magnificent series of fortifications named after Finnish Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal Karl von Mannerheim. The Russians made 5 separate drives into Finnish territory. They outnumbered the gallant defenders by 50 to 1. But as Germany introduced Blitzkrieg to the world, the Finns introduced another new form of war, the silent war. Heavily armed Finnish ski patrols, their white uniforms blending into the snow of the countryside, darted and probed the Russian invader into helpless confusion. In London, Winston Churchill watched.
Only Finland, superb, nay, sublime. Sublime in the jaws of peril. Finland shows what free men can do. The service rendered by Finland to mankind.
In the United States, there was much sympathy for the Finnish people and the Finnish nation. Finland, the nation that had fully paid its World War I debt to the United States. Finland, the country that President Roosevelt called in a major speech so infinitesimally small, it can do no injury to the Soviet Union. Finland, its heroic defenders immortalized by Robert Sherwood's 1941 Pulitzer Prize-winning play, There Shall Be No Night. Finland, small, heroic Finland, soon to be overcome only by the avalanche of massive Russian manpower and armor. In the West, with Poland gone, there was now what historians call the Phoney War. Another name entered the international language. Sitzkrieg, sit-down war. War of words. War of inaction. But in Great Britain, air raid instructions were constantly broadcast throughout the day.
The government have given instructions for the following important announcements. Closing of places of entertainment. All cinemas, theaters, and other places of entertainment are to be closed immediately until further notice. In the light of experience, it may be possible to allow the reopening of such places in some areas. They are being closed because if they were hit by a bomb, large numbers would be killed or injured. Sports gatherings and all gatherings for purposes of entertainment and amusement, whether outdoor or indoor, which involve large numbers congregating together, are prohibited until further notice. This refers especially to gatherings for purposes of entertainment. But people are earnestly requested not to crowd together unnecessarily in any circumstances. Air raid warning. As from now, no hooter or siren may be sounded except on the instructions of the police. In the event of threatened air raids, warnings will be given in urban areas by means of sirens or hooters, which will be sounded in some places by short intermittent blasts, and in other places by a warbling note changing every few seconds.
To a waiting world, the war had settled down to what they remembered wars to be. Armies settled behind fixed fortifications. In 1929, French War Minister André Maginot devised a series of fortifications of concrete and steel that would forever and for all time protect the homeland, the Maginot Line. The Germans had their own series of fortifications, the Sitzkrieg Line. Both defenses were termed impregnable. History would later prove that both fortifications were obsolete. As Christmas 1939 neared, great news was building up for the British Empire. The place, Montevideo, Uruguay. In the harbor of the Rio de la Plata, 3 British cruisers with the majestic-sounding names Ajax, Achilles, and Exeter trapped the pride of the German Navy, the pocket battleship Graf Spee. It is Sunday, December 17, 1939. And the Graf Spee, wounded by the British warships, has been ordered out to sea by neutral Uruguay. Graf Spee Captain Hans Longsdorff knows his ship is badly wounded. Outside the harbor, the British cruisers circle and wait. It is 6 p.m. The scene is an incongruous one. On the shore, more than 300,000 spectators watch, awaiting the impending duel. The Graf Spee weighs anchor and moves to the open sea. Suddenly, the massive German pocket battleship slows, then stops. In the United States, radio programs were interrupted by the excited voice of an announcer who broadcast the flash over the crackling imperfections of transocean radio.
We interrupt our regular program to bring you a special broadcast. We take you now to Montevideo, Uruguay. The Graf Spee explodes 5 miles from the coast. The ship has been scuttled.
The Graf Spee had been scuttled. Now an eyewitness to the last of the drama.
The ship is moving, rolling from side to side. There goes another explosion. The after turret has gone up. She's going down. She's going down by the stern. The stern is completely underwater. Flames are still shooting up into the air. Smoke.
When it was over, there was jubilation throughout the English-speaking world. From the British cruiser Exeter, there were many heroes. Here is a gunner, a day after the attack.
Dawn had just broken when we were woken up with a bugle calling action station, and we tumbled out and there was a wild rush to station. Some of us were in pants and shirts, while others were in overalls, because a few of the fellows sleep in these. Anyhow, there was every sort of rig-out you could think of.
Now a midshipman aboard the badly bruised Exeter.
It was about 6:15, and one of the finest days I'd ever seen, with a clear sky and a calm sea. My action station was officer of the 4-inch gun quarters, and when I had reached my proper billet, the enemy had opened fire on us. I could see her on our starboard beam. We thought she was the sheer. As I watched her, I saw 6 jets of flame leap from her 11-inch guns. After a short interval, I saw the results of these jets, as fountains of water suddenly rose up near us. As no orders had come through from the control to load the guns I was in charge of, because the enemy was out of range of them,
I ordered the guns crews to rig hoses and wet the decks. We were still doing this when I saw the Marines' turret being hit.
Now Captain Bell of the Exeter.
What did we do on that Wednesday morning? Nothing very much, really. But that which every officer and man is so accustomed to do that it is really second nature to him.
In London, First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill.
Ladies and gentlemen, the news which has come from Montevideo has been received with thankfulness in our island and with unconcealed satisfaction throughout the greater part of the world. The pocket battleship Graf Spee, which has been for many weeks preying upon the trade of the South Atlantic, has met her doom.
The Graf Spee was dead. There was much controversy following the scuttling. Naval experts the world over condemned Chancellor Hitler for ordering the end of the great ship while she was still able to travel at great speed, while still able to fire her massive power. For Graf Spee Captain Langsdorff, there was a similar end. 3 days after his ship went down in the waters of Montevideo, he performed a ceremonial suicide. He wrapped around him the flag of the old Imperial Navy. Then Langsdorff, veteran of Jutland, put a bullet in his head. On May 5th, the final epitaph of the Graf Spee. An item from Montevideo read, "The steel of the Graf Spee today was sold for £1,000 to Senor Julio Vigalajara." The Graf Spee, dead after only 5 years of life, had cost £3.75 million to build. Now an aftermath to the sinking of the Graf Spee, which many historians believe may have brought the war more quickly to Scandinavia. The auxiliary of the Graf Spee was the German ship Altmark. Aboard the Altmark were many British merchantmen picked up after the Graf Spee had sunk their ships, some 300 men. After the Spee was scuttled, the Altmark used all her cunning to avoid capture. She moved from South American waters to the waters surrounding the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. Finally, she moved into the territorial waters of Norway. British reconnaissance planes moved into the area. One of the pilots who spotted her said,
"So I flew round her several times and saw that she was flying the Norwegian flag."
Here's a report from another one of the pilots who spotted the Altmark.
"My navigator was able to identify the ship immediately as the Altmark through his binoculars, though she was painted a different color from what we had been told. And I closed formation with the leader to inform him that we had sighted our quarry at last."
February 16, 1940, His Majesty's ship Cossack intercepted the Altmark. 2 Norwegian gunboats signaled the Cossack that the Altmark had been searched and been found empty of prisoners. Winston Churchill personally wired the Cossack captain to make certain. That evening, a Cossack boarding party went aboard the Altmark. They found 299 British prisoners. Here is one of them.
I cannot find words to express our admiration for the magnificent seamanship and bravery of all those engaged in our rescue.
Now the aftermath of the recapturing of the Altmark prisoners. In Germany, Chancellor Hitler watched with concern the movements of British ships in Scandinavian waters. The reason? Neutral Norway and neutral Sweden were important keys to the German war effort. Sweden's great iron ore deposits were Germany's main source of supply for the industrial Ruhr war plants. In winter, ice-locked Swedish ports forced the shipments to go through the Norwegian port of Narvik, where German ships transported the ore to the homeland. Almost since the war's beginning, First Admiralty Lord Winston Churchill pleaded for the mining of the Norwegian territorial waters to prevent the unhampered movement of German ships. Fearing world scorn if they brought the war to neutral Scandinavia, the British government turned down 12 Churchill warnings. But now the Altmark action off Norway brought fear to Germany. An Allied takeover of Norway's ports would immobilize the Ruhr war effort. Operation Weser is planned, the takeover of Norway. The date of the invasion, April 9th. Now the unbelievable. As Germany prepared for the invasion of Norway, Great Britain finally reacted to the danger. On April 8th, they mined the Norwegian territorial waters. Norway protested. The following day, Denmark was informed by Germany that they had evidence that the Allies were about to invade Scandinavia. Hitler said, since the Scandinavian countries cannot adequately protect themselves, German armies would move in to protect them. The following day, Germany informed Norway of the Allied invasion. Germany, too, would come to their aid. The invasion of Norway and Denmark was underway. Here is the actual BBC announcement.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is a special news bulletin. As listeners to our early morning bulletins will have heard, Denmark has been invaded by German forces, and Norway is at war with Germany.
Clement Attlee, later to become British Prime Minister, spoke of the attack.
The brutal, unprovoked attack on the two neutral, peaceful Scandinavian states shows clearly that the rulers of Germany are devoid of any respect for international law and morality. Denmark and Norway, two small, weak states, had done nothing which could give the Germans any cause of complaint against them, unless indeed the mere fact that these countries were the homes of highly civilized free peoples was in itself an offense to these modern barbarians.
The Phoney War was over. The Germans were again on the march. Just 3 days before in Great Britain, Prime Minister Chamberlain in a major speech said, after 7 months of war, I feel 10 times as confident as I did in the beginning. I feel that our position now is stronger against the enemy than it was in the beginning. Then came the statement that in 35 days would ring derisively through the House of Commons as his government began to fall. Said Chamberlain on April 5th. When war broke out, it was natural, since German preparations were far ahead of our own, that the enemy would take advantage of his initial superiority and attempt to overwhelm us and France before we had time to make good our deficiencies. Is it not a very extraordinary thing that no such attempt was made? Whatever the reason, one thing is certain. Hitler has missed the bus. A token British expeditionary force was sent to Norway. It met with disaster. Here is a British soldier just returned from Norway.
One thing about the Germans. They're not the same Germans as in the last war. They won't come close at you. They just keep popping at you from a distance. They are poor fighters, and they're dirty fighters. I saw 20 Norwegian Red Cross lorries on the road between Donbass and Aldersnes, being deliberately bombed and machine gunned by German aeroplanes.
So Operation Weser was successful. In Norway, a new name would arise that would, until the end of hostilities, stand as a symbol for treachery and treason the world over. Quisling. Vidkun Quisling. Quisling, former Minister of War, collaborator. Quisling, Prime Minister of Norway during the German occupation. Quisling, hanged as a collaborator and traitor by his own country immediately after the war. So now the Germans were on the march again. In a few short weeks, the war would explode with unequaled fury. With Operation Weser successful, the German High Command could now turn their full attention to Operation Yellow, the invasion of Belgium and the Low Countries, and simultaneously, the invasion of France. It is May 7th, 1940. In the House of Commons, there is crisis. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stands almost alone against the abuse of almost all the House members. The debacle in Scandinavia has all but tottered the government. There are again cries of "Speak for England," and the once calm, unperturbed Chamberlain is now shaken and defeated. One by one, the speakers call him to the mark, and he is verbally annihilated by friend and foe. The cries ring throughout the chamber. Hitler missed the bus. Hitler missed the bus. An angry Leopold Amory leaps to his feet and brings other members cheering to his side when he rings out Cromwell's famous words, "Depart, I say, and let us have done with you. In the name of God, go." And finally, the venerable, beloved David Lloyd George, in one of his last major utterances to the group that cheered him 100-fold times in the past, spoke these crushing words. It is not a question of who are the Prime Minister's friends. It is a far bigger issue. He has appealed for sacrifice. The nation is prepared for every sacrifice, so long as the nation is confident that those who are leading are doing their best. I say solemnly that the Prime Minister should give an example of sacrifice, because there is nothing which can contribute more to victory in this war than that he should sacrifice his seals of office. In 3 days, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain would resign, and Winston Churchill would be called to kiss the hand of the King. Winston Churchill would become Prime Minister of Great Britain. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you the Phoney War, the actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic era of the century. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, France in torment.
It was clear
6 o'clock that night, Winston Churchill writes, I was taken to the king. His Majesty received me graciously and bade me sit down. He looked at me searchingly and quizzically for some moments and then said, I suppose you don't know why I have sent for you. Adopting his mood, I replied, Sir, I simply cannot imagine why. He laughed and said, I want you to form a government. Winston Churchill had become Prime Minister of the British Empire. The next day, Prime Minister Churchill spoke to the House of Commons. Said Churchill, you ask what is our policy. I will say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, and with all our might, and with all the strength that God can give us. To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word. Victory. Victory at all costs. Come then, let us go forward with our united strength. Then Churchill spoke the words that would be remembered for all time.
I have never promised anything but blood, tears, toil, and sweat.
There would be much sorrow before victory. The invasion of the Low Countries was complete, devastating, catastrophic. The tiny Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, 55 miles long, 34 miles wide, fell in only a few hours. Luxembourg, neutral, independence guaranteed by all the great powers. Luxembourg, bounded on the north and west by Belgium, on the south by France. Luxembourg, the gateway to the great Ardennes battlefield of World War I, and a direct strike at the heart of France. Luxembourg, gone in less than one day. On May 12th, the German army crossed the French frontier, while in Holland there was much misery. The famous dikes of Holland were released, and the waters spread over the land. But the Nazi war machine was awesome and all-powerful. And in 5 days, after suffering more than 100,000 casualties, the Dutch army capitulated. Belgium fought on. But now the unbelievable. Incredibly, the German juggernaut, slicing through the Ardennes forest, passed through the seemingly impregnable Meuse barrier and opened a 50-mile breach between Namur and Sedan. The gateway to the French capital was open. The famed Maginot Line was bypassed. France was open to direct assault. Just 6 days after the initial assault on the Low Countries, the great German breakthrough had materialized. France, the nation with a military heritage, unequaled in victory and valor. The France that was Marshal Foch. My center is giving away. My right is pushed back. Excellent. I will attack. The France that is Henri Giraud. Men pass, but France is eternal. The France that would be Charles de Gaulle. France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. It is May 19th, 1940. 9 days since the attack. Luxembourg and Holland have fallen. Belgium is reeling from a death blow. The magnificent French army has been broken through and moves back on the great capital city of Paris. From London, the Prime Minister of but 9 days has yet to speak personally to the British nation. It is now time. Mr. Churchill has just returned from an hour's flight to Paris. All is terrible in the French capital city. He has spoken to Premier Paul Reynaud, the successor to Edouard Daladier, as head of the French government. Reynaud has told Churchill, "We have been defeated. We are beaten. We have lost the battle. The front has broken at Sedan. They are pouring through. All is over." In London, Prime Minister Churchill will speak to the British Empire. It is May 19th, 1940. To many, the words you are about to hear constitute the most magnificent speech ever made by mortal man.
I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all, of the cause of freedom. A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans, by a remarkable combination of air bombing and heavily armored tanks, have broken through the French defenses north of the Maginot Line, and strong columns of their armored vehicles are ravaging the open country, which for the first day or two was without defenders. They have penetrated deeply and spread alarm and confusion in their track. Behind them there are now appearing infantry in lorries, and behind them again the large masses are moving forward. The regroupment of the French armies to make head against and also to strike at this intruding wedge has been proceeding for several days, largely assisted by the magnificent efforts of the Royal Air Force. We must not allow ourselves to be intimidated by the presence of these armored vehicles in unexpected places behind our lines. If they are behind our front, the French are also at many points fighting actively behind theirs. Both sides are therefore in an extremely dangerous position. And if the French army and our own army are well handled, as I believe they will be, if the French retain that genius for recovery and counterattack for which they have so long been famous, and if the British Army shows the dogged endurance and solid fighting power of which there have been so many examples in the past, then a sudden transformation of the scene might spring into being. It would be foolish, however, to disguise the gravity of the hour. It would be still more foolish to lose heart and courage, or to suppose that well-trained, well-equipped armies, numbering 3 or 4 millions of men, can be overcome in the space of a few weeks or even months by a scoop or raid of mechanized vehicles, however formidable. We may look with confidence to the stabilization of the front in France and to the general engagement of the masses, which will enable the qualities of the French and British soldiers to be matched squarely against those of their adversaries.
As Churchill spoke, the magnitude of the German onslaught was known but not believed. There was chaos on the roads. The exodus from Paris had begun. All the way south to Bordeaux, the roads filled with cars, bicycles, taxicabs, trucks, bakery vans, roadsters, anything and everything that had wheels. The sun was hot, and spring seemed to turn into the intolerable heat of the summer. The deadly heat of the flame and smoke from shell and bomb mixed with the heat of thousands upon thousands of land machines covering the roads. Paris roads were a montage of different heats, from the ground, from the sky.
For myself, I have invincible confidence in the French army and its leader. Only a very small part of that splendid army had yet been heavily engaged. And only a very small part of France had yet been invaded. There is good evidence to show that practically the whole of the specialized and mechanized forces of the enemy have been already thrown into the battle. And we know that very heavy losses have been inflicted upon them. No officer or man, no brigade or division which grapples at close quarters with the enemy wherever encountered can fail to make a worthy contribution to the general result. The armies must cast away the idea of resisting attack behind concrete lines or natural obstacles, and must realize that mastery can only be regained by furious and unrelenting assault. And this spirit must not only animate the high command, but must inspire every fighting man. In the air, often at serious odds, often at odds hitherto thought overwhelming, we have been clawing down 3 or 4 to 1 of our enemies. My confidence in our ability to fight it out to the finish with the German Air Force has been strengthened by the fierce encounters which have taken place and are taking place. At the same time, our heavy bombers are striking nightly at the taproot of German mechanized power and have already inflicted serious damage upon the oil refineries on which the Nazi effort to dominate the world directly depends. We must expect that as soon as stability is reached on the Western Front, the bulk of that hideous apparatus of aggression, which dashed Holland into ruin and slavery in a few days, will be turned upon us. I'm sure I speak for all when I say we are ready to face it, to endure it, and to retaliate against it, to any extent that the unwritten laws of war permit.
Civilians move south, while the French forces not trapped by the onrushing German forces move to the seaports for the escape to Great Britain.
There will be many men and many women in this island who, when the ordeal comes upon them, and come it will feel comfort and even a pride that they are sharing the perils of our lads at the front, soldiers, sailors, and airmen, God bless them, and are drawing away for them a part at least of the onslaught they have to bear. Is not this the appointed time for all to make the utmost exertions in their power? If the battle is to be won, we must provide our men with ever-increasing quantities of the weapons and ammunition they need. We must have, and have quickly, more aeroplanes, more tanks, more shells, more guns. There is imperious need for these vital munitions. They increase our strength against the powerfully armed enemy. They replace the wastage of the obstinate struggle. And the knowledge that wastage will speedily be replaced enables us to draw more readily upon our reserves and throw them in now that everything counts so much. Our task is not only to win the battle, but to win the war. After this battle in France abates its force, there will come the battle for our island, for all that Britain is and all that Britain means. That will be the struggle. from the chiefs of the French Republic, and in particular from its indomitable Prime Minister, Monsieur Reynaud, the most sacred pledges that whatever happens, they will fight to the end, be it bitter nor be it glorious. Nay, if we fight to the end, it can only be glorious. Having received His Majesty's commission, I have formed an administration of men and women of every party and of almost every point of view. We have differed and quarreled in the past, but now one bond unites us all: to wage war until victory is won, and never to surrender ourselves to servitude and shame, whatever the cost and the agony may be. If this is one of the most awe-striking periods in the long history of France and Britain, it is also, beyond doubt, the most sublime. Side by side, unaided except by their kith and kin in the great dominions and by the wide empires which rest beneath their shield, side by side the British and French peoples have advanced to rescue not only Europe but mankind from the foulest and most soul-destroying tyranny which has ever darkened and stained the pages of history. Behind them, behind us, behind the armies and fleets of Britain and France, gather a group of shattered states and bludgeoned great races: the Czechs, the Poles, the Norwegians, the Danes, the Dutch, the Belgians, upon all of whom the long night of barbarism will descend, unbroken even by a star of hope, unless we conquer, as conquer we must, as conquer we shall.
So the Prime Minister had spoken. France was reeling. The British Empire would soon fight alone. The French people were in agony. France was in torment. Broadcasting Company has brought you France in Torment, the actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period in our history. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, the fall of France.
I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all, of the cause of freedom.
It is May 19th, 1940.
Battle is raging.
Winston Churchill is speaking to the British Empire and the world. He has been Prime Minister for but 9 days. The onrushing Nazi war machine has forced the Dutch army to capitulate in but 5 days. Luxembourg had already surrendered on the day of the Nazi attack. The Belgian army is in complete retreat, and the French army has broken at Sedan. German armies are poised for the dash to Paris and beyond. The Phoney War is over. The powerful German Wehrmacht that smashed Poland in less than 1 month, that has moved almost unopposed into Denmark and Norway, has now cracked the Low Countries and France in a little more than 1 week. German newspapers were proclaiming the end of the war. And now Britain was all but alone. And they called to lead the nation a man of courage. His name, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, born of another time, of another era. Winston Churchill, 66 years old, beloved, majestic, unbending. Winston Churchill, who on his opening speech to the House just 9 days before said, "You ask what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, and with all our might, and with all the strength that God can give us. To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalog of human crime. That is our policy. You ask what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Come then, let us go forward together with our united strength." He has spoken to the House of Commons. Now he would speak to the nation.
I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all, of the cause of freedom. A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans, by a remarkable combination of air bombing and heavily armored tanks, have broken through the French defenses north of the Maginot Line, and strong columns of their armored vehicles are ravaging the open country, which for the first day or two was without defenders. We have differed and quarreled in the past, but now one bond unites us all. We shall.
Now events moved quickly, but the days of May moved slowly for the Allies. The Blitzkrieg was a reality. Fortresses like the Maginot Line meant little to the onrushing Germans. That which could not be run over was bypassed. On May 18th, Premier Paul Reynaud shook up his cabinet, making himself Minister of Defense. Now came drama of the present that brought back the greatness of the past. Reynaud appointed 85-year-old Marshal Henri Pétain as Vice Premier. Pétain, hero of Verdun. Henri Pétain, who said at Verdun, "They shall not pass." And And now to the front came another name of the past, General Maxime Weygand. Weygand, 72 years old, former chief of staff to Marshal Foch. Weygand, a product of another time, another war. The Weygand line was formed and almost immediately smashed. What military experts had called the finest army in Europe was now reeling and in the throes of the death rattle. From Paris, Premier Reynaud.
Du drame de la bataille de France comprennent donc et qu'ils comprennent vite, car
Mr. Reynaud is saying, let all who are watching this drama of the Battle of France understand therefore, and let them understand at once. For the stakes are enormous, and only time can truly measure them. As for us, more than ever before, we have confidence in our arm.
And now the scene shifts to Belgium. It is 17 days since the Germans attacked Belgium. All was in disorder. On May 27th, King Leopold III called the British High Command. Said the message, "The Belgian army is losing heart. It has been fighting without a break for 4 days and under heavy bombardment. The time is rapidly approaching when we will be unable to continue the fight. We will have to soon capitulate to avoid a collapse." The fall of Belgium was expected, but not this quickly. From Great Britain, Winston Churchill and his war leaders had prepared for every possible disaster. As early as May 14th, just 4 days after the German attack, the British Admiralty made round-the-clock announcements to pleasure craft owners to have their boats ready for any eventuality. Now, as the month of May was coming to a close, the announcements over the BBC were longer and at more frequent intervals. And now the British, French, Belgians, and Poles were slogging back to French and Belgian ports. A small British force was holding out at Calais. The French were fighting rearguard actions at Lille and Cassel. On March 29th, the German High Command issued a victory communique. It stated that the British and French armies, almost 500,000 men, were trapped and doomed. The troops were now at the one port that gave them a chance, a name that would live for all history: the port of Dunkirk. The time had come for the evacuation. The British called it Operation Dynamo. Poet laureate John Masefield called it the 9 Days' Wonder. Actually, 887 ships of every size and shape delivered 339,000 British and French troops to the safety of the British Isles. They would fight again another day. The British commentator J.B. Priestley.
These Brighton bells and Brighton queens left that innocent, foolish world of theirs to sail into the inferno, to defy bombs, shells, magnetic mines, torpedoes, machine gun fire, to rescue our soldiers. A catalogue of misfortunes and miscalculations ended as an epic of gallantry. We have a queer habit, and you can see it running through our history, of conjuring up such transformations. Out of a black gulf of humiliation and despair rises a sun of blazing glory.
Now the Minister of Shipping.
Father and his son would take their yacht across from some South Coast port without a word to anybody and bring it back full of troops. There was a Deal boatman who took his motorboat across with several open rowing boats in tow and brought them all back full of troops.
Germans, Winston Churchill once again spoke. His words, "We must be very careful not to assign this deliverance the attributes of victory. Wars are not won by evacuation." From Great Britain, Charles de Gaulle.
Moi, Général de Gaulle, j'entreprends ici, en Angleterre, cette tâche nationale. J'invite tous les militaires français des armées de terre, de mer et de l'air. J'invite les ingénieurs et les ouvriers.
General de Gaulle is saying, I, General de Gaulle, undertake this national task here in England. I invite all French fighting men in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. I invite French engineers and French munition workers who may be in British territory or who can contrive to get there to join me. I invite the leaders, the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the French forces on land, sea, and air, wherever they may be at this moment, to get in touch with me. I call upon all Frenchmen who wish to remain free to listen to me and to follow me. Long live France, in freedom, in honor, in independence.
As Charles de Gaulle spoke, Paris was undergoing its first air attack. It is now June 3rd, 1940, and disaster leads to more disaster in an unending chain. Chancellor Hitler has ordered 100 Nazi divisions into the attack. Across the Somme, into Normandy, south of Amiens, and around the northern flank of the Maginot Line. The skies were heavy with the planes of the Luftwaffe. The British Air Force, after saving the French, Poles, Belgians, and themselves at Dunkirk, were now regrouping for a possible assault on the home island. The French were in misery. Their roads were clogged with every form of vehicle, with persons of every station. The German troops were 35 miles from Paris. It is 5 p.m., June 10th, 1940. The place, Rome. The situation, Il Duce. Benito Mussolini is speaking in the Piazza Venezia. Thousands upon thousands of Italians are gathered to hear Il Duce. France is dying, and loudspeakers throughout Italy are blaring forth the announcement that Mussolini will speak that afternoon. Many of the populace believe that the Duce is about to announce that France and Great Britain have sued for peace. They will be shocked. They will be surprised. They will be loyal to the Duce.
Mussolini began. Combatants on land, sea, and in the air. Black shirts of the Revolution and of the Legion. Men and women of Italy, of the Empire, and of the Kingdom of Albania, listen. An hour, signed by destiny, is ticking on the skies of our country. An hour of irreparable decision. A declaration of war has been given to the ambassadors. To the ambassadors of France and England.
As Mussolini talked, the populace was suddenly awakened by the fury of his talk. The cries of Duce, Duce, Duce rang through the afternoon. Mussolini continued on. Said the Duce, "Our conscience is clear. If today we have decided to take the risks and sacrifices of war, it is because the honor, interests, and future firmly impose it. Since a great people is truly such only if it considers its obligations sacred and does not avoid the supreme trials that determine the course of history. Then Mussolini concluded, "On this eve of an event of import for centuries, we turn our thoughts to His Majesty the King and Emperor, who has always understood the thought of the country. Lastly, we salute the new Führer, the chief of the great Allied Germany. Proletarian fascist Italy has arisen a third time, strong, proud, compact as never before. There is only one order. It already wins over and inflames hearts from the Alps to the Indian Ocean. Conquer. And we will conquer in order finally to give a world of peace with justice to Italy, to Europe, to the universe. Italian people, rush to arms and show your tenacity, your courage, your valor." In the United States, on a warm, sunny June 10th, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was scheduled to make an address at the University of Virginia. It was not scheduled as a momentous address. The Italian Declaration called for some alterations in the president's speech. It would now become one of the most memorable addresses of modern history.
Every generation of young men and women in America has questions to ask the world. Most of the time, they are the simple but nevertheless difficult questions. Questions of work to do, opportunities to find, ambitions to satisfy. But every now and again in the history of the Republic, a different kind of question presents itself. A question that asks not about the future of an individual or even of a generation, but about the future of the country, the future of the American people. There was such a time at the beginning of our history, as a nation. Young people asked themselves in those days what lay ahead, not for themselves, but for the new United States. There was such a time, again, in the seemingly endless years of the war between the states. Young men and young women on both sides of the line asked themselves not what trades or professions they would enter, what lives they would make, but what was to become of the country they had known. There is such a time again today. Again today, the young men and the young women of America ask themselves with earnestness and with deep concern this same question. What is to become of the country we know? It is understandable to all of us, I think, that they should ask this question. They read the words of those who are telling them that the ideal of individual liberty, the ideal of free franchise, the ideal of peace through justice is a decadent ideal. They read the word and hear the boast of those who say that a belief in force directed by self-chosen leaders, is the new and vigorous system which will overrun the earth. They have seen the ascendancy of this philosophy of force in nation after nation, where free institutions and individual liberties were once maintained. The people and the government of the United States have seen with the utmost regret and with grave disquiet the decision of the Italian government to engage in the hostilities now raging in Europe. more than 3 months ago, the chief of the Italian government sent me word that because of the determination of Italy to limit, so far as might be possible, the spread of the European conflict, more than 200 millions of people in the region of the Mediterranean had been enabled to escape the suffering and the devastation of war. The government of Italy has now chosen to preserve what it terms its freedom of action and to fulfill what it states are its promises to Germany. In so doing, it has manifested disregard for the rights and security of other nations, disregard for the lives of the peoples of those nations which are directly threatened by the spread of this war, and has evidenced its unwillingness to find the means through pacific negotiation for the satisfaction of what it believes are its legitimate aspirations. On this 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
So now Italy had entered the war, and a dying France would have more misery. On June 12th, 2 days after Italy's entrance into the war, Prime Minister Churchill flew to Tours to persuade the French to honor its obligations and not sue for an individual peace, but to carry on the war from North Africa. Premier Reynaud wanted to continue the struggle from North Africa, but his generals would not support him. Said General Weygand, "In a few weeks, England's neck will be wrung like a chicken." On June 16th, Churchill made one of the most momentous proposals in the history of the empire. He called for a declaration of union between Great Britain and France. It guaranteed immediate citizenship to all the French populace, and every Briton would become a French citizen. A single war cabinet would be formed, a single British-French army. Both nations would be joined, and the final line of the proposal read, "And thus we shall conquer." But the French refused. They wanted to surrender. The war on the continent was over. The Battle of Britain was about to begin.
The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you The Fall of France, the actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, the fall of France. On June 10th, 1940, France was in misery. It was just 1 month since the Nazi Panzer divisions had crashed the borders of the Low Countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Holland. 2 days later, the German Wehrmacht, spearheaded by 100 divisions, crossed into France. On March 15th, the Dutch army surrendered, and the following day, the French army broke ranks at Sedan. The Belgian army surrendered. Now the British and French were being driven into the sea. In one of the most amazing evacuations in the history of man, more than 350,000 Allied soldiers in boats and ships of every description were returned to the safety of the British shores. But now the French and British would face another blow. It is June 10th, 1940.
Mussolini began. Combatants on land, sea, and in the air. Black shirts of the Revolution and of the Legion. Men and women of Italy, of the Empire, and of the Kingdom of Albania, listen. An hour, signed by destiny, is ticking on the skies of our country. An hour of irreparable decision. A declaration of war has been given to the ambassadors. To the ambassadors of France and England.
Italy has declared war against Great Britain and France. In the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke.
The people and the government of the United States have seen with the utmost regret and with grave disquiet the decision of the Italian government to engage in the hostilities now raging in Europe. More than 3 months ago, the chief of the Italian government sent me word that because of the determination of Italy to limit, so far as might be possible, the spread of the European conflict, more than 200 millions of people in the region of the Mediterranean had been enabled to escape the suffering and the devastation of war. The government of Italy has now chosen to preserve what it terms its freedom of action and to fulfill what it states are its promises to Germany. In so doing, it has manifested disregard for the rights and security of other nations, disregard for the lives of the peoples of those nations which are directly threatened by the spread of this war, and has evidenced its unwillingness to find the means through pacific negotiation for the satisfaction of what it believes are its legitimate aspirations. On this 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
Italy had entered the war. Italy, traditional friend of Great Britain. Italy, an ally of the United States, Great Britain, and France in World War I. Italy, whose many sons had crossed the ocean to become bulwarks of American civilization. Italy, a nation steeped in the lore of freedom. Italy, the nation that produced Garibaldi and Cavour. Italy, the nation that produced Mussolini. Italy was now at war with France and Great Britain. A brief recapitulation of the events leading to the entrance of Italy into the war. On May 16, 1940, 6 days after Prime Minister Winston Churchill took office, he wrote to Benito Mussolini. Said Mr. Churchill, "Now that I have taken up my office as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, I look back to our meetings in Rome and feel a desire to speak words of goodwill to you as chief of the Italian nation across what seems to be a swiftly widening gulf. Is it too late to stop a river of blood from flowing between the British and Italian peoples? If you so decree, it must be so. I beg you to believe that it is in no spirit of weakness or of fear that I make this solemn appeal which will remain on record. Down the ages, above all other calls, comes the cry that the joint heirs of Latin and Christian civilization must not be ranged against one another in mortal strife. Hearken to it, I beseech you, in all honor and respect, before the dread signal is given. It will never be given by us." Two days later came Mussolini's reply. Mussolini wrote, "Without going too far back in time, I remind you of the initiative taken by your government to organize at Geneva sanctions against Italy engaged in securing for herself a small space in the African sun. If it was to honor your signature that your government declared war on Germany, you will understand that the same sense of honor and of respect for engagements assumed in the Italian-German treaties guides Italian policy today and tomorrow in the face of any event whatsoever. In 3 weeks, Italy would honor those treaties." It is still June 10th, 1940. From Paris, Premier Reynaud makes an appeal.
Spectateurs du drame de la bataille de France comprennent donc, et qu'ils comprennent vite, car
Mr. Reynaud is saying, "Let all who are watching this drama of the Battle of France understand therefore, and let them understand at once. For the stakes are enormous, and only time can truly measure them. As for us, more than ever before, we have confidence in our arm."
Four days later, the tragedy of France was all but complete. The Germans were entering Paris. In one of the last broadcasts from Paris under French rule, the crackling, almost incoherent strains of the Marseillaise, pitifully but dramatically, tell the story of the French defeat. Yet the hope of a new tomorrow. Paris was all but deserted. Within an hour after the Germans entered the city, swastikas were unfurled atop every important building of the city. Now France, and in particular Paris, would be in unbelievable misery. Everywhere there were bands, and the martial music blared out the marching songs of the Boche. As the German soldiers marched and remarched in ceremonial review, the Axis press wrote with contempt of the plight of the Allies. Said one Italian newspaper, "Let the French nation learn once and for all time the torture of defeat, to respect and honor other peoples. Let them remain on their knees for centuries. As for the English, let them remember that their time will come." Now Great Britain was alone. Unusual proposals sprung from the Empire to ensure the continuance of the French nation in the conflict. The British proposed that one nation of Great Britain and France be formed with a single effort, a single force be realized, that thus so joined, And as the Prime Minister called for Great Britain's finest hour, the darkest hour in the history of France would be unfolding. It is June 21st, 1940, the place, the town of Compiègne, France. The situation, the signing of the peace between Germany and France. The place, a town 45 miles north of Paris, the town of Compiègne. Compiègne, the final humiliation of France. Compiègne, where on November 11th, 1918, Marshal Ferdinand Foch had dictated the surrender terms to the Germans at the end of World War I. The scene was a strange one. Compiègne would now become the surrender place of the French. From the relics of World War I, the Germans had gathered the same railway car used in 1918 for their surrender. It would be used in the surrender ceremony today. The French had built a museum near the surrender site. One monument to the days of 1918 read, "To the heroic soldiers of France, defenders of our country and of right, glorious liberators of Alsace-Lorraine." Another inscription of a monument read, "Here on the 11th of November, 1918, succumbed the criminal pride of the German Empire, vanquished by the free peoples which it tried to enslave." Now it is 3:15 p.m. An automobile draws up to the Alsace-Lorraine monument at Compiègne. A door opens and out steps Chancellor Adolf Hitler. He is wearing his army uniform. Below his left breast pocket, he wears the Iron Cross. Accompanying the Führer are Marshal Hermann Göring, second in command, and Rudolf Hess, his third in command. Then there are the men of the military. Chief of High Command, General Wilhelm Keitel. General Walter von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief, German Army. Admiral Erich Raeder, Grand Admiral of the German Fleet. Almost as tourists would the Nazi leaders slowly move around the open clearing, reading the inscriptions on the French monuments, tributes to the 1918 surrender. Not showing what they felt in their hearts, the Germans moved impassively from monument to monument. A few minutes later, the French surrender delegation arrived. The French and German officers exchanged salutes, but there were no handshakes. The Germans entered the railway car. A few minutes later, the French entered. Now a subtle, cynical flourish from the Germans. As if on signal, they rose from their chairs, a courtesy not afforded the Germans in 1918. Then Hitler nodded toward Field Marshal Keitel, and the ceremony was underway. The proceedings took 27 minutes. An eyewitness to the ceremony.
Hello, CBS. Hello, NBC. This is William C. Kirker now carrying on. Hitler himself was the first one to rise as soon as the French plenipotentiaries entered the dining car. By the by, the number of that car is number D2604. And as soon as Adolf Hitler stood up to greet the French delegates by giving the Nazi salute, Herr von Ribbentrop and Rudolf Hess followed suit, while Field Marshal Göring and Grand Admiral von Raeder raised their baton, leaving General von Brauchitsch and von Keitel as the only ones to give the military salute. The French gentlemen themselves, in turn, greeted with the military salute, and all those present wore uniforms, except Monsieur Noël, who was attired in smart civilian clothes. He himself was quite a contrast to the glittering uniforms which surrounded him. However, undeterredly, he took his place almost facing Herr Hitler, who was sitting at the opposite side of that long green table with his back towards the statue of General Foch. Well, it was 21 years and 8 months ago that Compiègne was the scene of the signing of an armistice. And today, we are right here on the very same spot. It is the same car which was used that time, the same table, the same chairs. Only this time, everything is reversed. Where Marshal Foch sat that time, now Hitler sat. Where the German delegates had their place, Now the French plenipotentiaries are seated. Everything is reversed. Then it was Germany who was asking for an armistice, and now it is France.
Deutschland, Deutschland über alles.
As the Germans left the car, the band struck up the martial music. All stood at attention as once again Deutschland über alles and the Horst Wessel song rang through the wooded area of Compiègne. The French delegation was headed by General Charles Hunsiger. He informed the Germans that their terms were hard and merciless, more severe than the terms the Allies had imposed on Germany in 1918. The Germans were adamant. Within 24 hours, the French signed the instrument of surrender. The terms: the demobilization of the French fleet, the turning over of all anti-Nazi Germans residing in France, the conditions that any Frenchman caught while fighting with another country against Germany would be shot. And finally, the most tragic term of all, that French prisoners would not be released until the conclusion of peace. General Weygand, who agreed to this term, believed the British were just a few short weeks from complete defeat. History, however, records that General Weygand condemned 1.5 million French prisoners to Nazi prisoner camps for 5 years. As France died, there was one French voice that arose from the grave. It belonged to General Charles de Gaulle. Said General de Gaulle, "France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war." 5 years, 2 months, and 13 days later, France would live again. The Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you The Fall of France, the voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, climb Mount Niitaka. Translation, attack Pearl Harbor according to plan.
I repeat again that I stand on the platform of our party. We will not participate in foreign wars, and we will not send our army, naval or air forces to fight in foreign lands outside of the Americas, except in case of attack.
That was the voice of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the summer of 1940. Precedent was being broken. He would be the first man to ever run for the presidency for a third term. 1 year and 1 month after defeating Wendell Willkie, the president would speak before an extraordinary session of Congress.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn has just introduced the president. It is 12:29 p.m., Monday, December 8, 1941. Another precedent is about to be broken. For the first time in the 9 years that he has been in office, cheers and applause will ring out from both sides of the historic chamber, Democrats and Republicans alike. There is good reason. This is the day following the Japanese air attack at the naval base Navy men affectionately call Pearl. This is the story of December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. November 1941. Europe is at war. 4 months earlier in June, Germany attacks Russia, and the following month, Great Britain and Russia sign a mutual aid pact. But there are rumblings also in the Far East. It was in July of 1940 that President Roosevelt signed an order freezing all Japanese assets in the United States. 3 months later in Washington, an historic event took place. The peacetime drafting of young men into the armed forces. Listen closely. In the audience is a mother who knows her son's draft number. President Roosevelt speaks.
Secretary of War will now draw the first number. The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
A mother's scream, the first of many that would invade the American home. Now the war in Europe was becoming part of American life. The draft, too, became important in the oncoming presidential campaign. President Roosevelt was running for a third term.
We are telling the world that we are free, and we intend to remain free and at peace. We are free to live and love and laugh. We face the future with confidence and with courage. We are Americans.
His opponent, Wendell Willkie.
And let me tell you something else. That one-man rule always leads to. It always leads to the road to war.
The president again.
I repeat again that I stand on the platform of our party. We will not participate in foreign wars, and we will not send our army, naval, or air forces to fight in foreign lands outside of the Americas, except in case of attack.
Wendell Willkie.
More than 9 million of our fellow citizens are without jobs. We have little equipment for an army, and we have only a few hundred modern military airplanes. That is the record, and I challenge the third-term candidate to prove it false.
In November, the nation voted. More than 27 million votes for Roosevelt, 22 million for Willkie. 38 states in the Electoral College for Roosevelt, 10 for Willkie. 2 months later, Roosevelt spoke of the danger to the United States.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
To most Americans, the danger zone was Europe. Germany, and Italy. Charles A. Lindbergh.
These wars in Europe are not wars in which our civilization is defending itself against some Asiatic intruder. There is no Genghis Khan or Xerxes marching against our Western nations. This is simply one more of those age-old struggles within our own family of nations. If we enter fighting for democracy abroad, we may end by losing it at home.
To the president's aid came his recent opponent, Wendell Willkie.
Providing the aid we give to Britain is effective, it offers the best, the very best clear chance for us to keep out of war. Hitler, in my judgment, will make war on us or on our friends and allies in this hemisphere when, as, and if he chooses.
The Japanese were not considered a formidable foe. But almost quietly, the 20th century saw the Japanese on the move. Japan, a quick history of aggression. In 1929, China released a version of Japan's famed Tanaka Memorial Papers, the blueprint of domination engineered by Prime Minister Gichi Tanaka. It called for aggressive moves in Manchuria, Mongolia, India, Asia Minor, Central Asia, the archipelago. In 1931, the execution of the plan began. Japan invaded Manchuria. 6 years later, the attack on China. In December of 1937, the United States gunboat Phoney was sunk by Japanese planes on the Yangtze River. 3 years later, they formed an alliance with Germany and Italy. October 1941, General Hideki Tojo assumes power. He becomes premier. His name will be a curse on every American GI's lips for the next 4 years. Every Japanese soldier will be known as Tojo. His cabinet is filled with Army and Navy officers. They smell of gunpowder. The Japanese doctrine? A series of behavior codes that are impossible for Western minds to understand. Kodo, the way of the emperor. Shinto, the way of the gods. Bushido, death for disobedience. Kamikaze, a glorious death for the empire. Banzai, 10,000 years, forever. It is November 10th, 1941. A warning comes to Americans from Prime Minister Winston Churchill of Great Britain.
I take this occasion to say, and it is my duty to say, that should the United States become involved in war with Japan, the British declaration will follow within the hour.
Events move quickly. 4 days after Churchill's speech, Tojo's special peace envoy, Saburo Kurusu, arrives in San Francisco to assist Japanese Ambassador Nomuru in talks with Secretary of State Cordell Hull. Historical evidence indicates he knew not of his nation's plans.
You all know how difficult my mission is, but I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
Now events move even more quickly. 3 days later, the Japanese envoys presented their demands to Cordell Hull. To American reporters, envoy Kurusu said, "I have come to make a touchdown." Unbeknown to him, the Tokyo signals called for him to be a decoy. He would not score the touchdown he thought he came for. Peace. Neither would he fumble the mission he was sent on. Camouflage. You will now hear one of the most amazing broadcasts ever made. It is December 7th, 1941 in New York. The time is 1:15 p.m. A spokesman for the Foreign Policy Association is on the air, speaking to a coast-to-coast audience. In Hawaii, dawn has just broken. In the skies over Hawaii, Japanese planes are approaching the United States naval base of Pearl Harbor.
Acting on reports that 125,000 Japanese troops were assembled in Indochina, President Roosevelt made a personal appeal to the Japanese Emperor. On Tuesday, President Roosevelt had asked Tokyo for a quick explanation of the aim of these Japanese troop movements into Indochina.
A brief recapitulation of the dramatic events. Japanese demands were formally turned down by the United States on November 17th. 1 week and 1 day later, November 25th, United States counter-demands were made. At precisely the same moment, from Tonkan Bay in the Kuril Islands of Japan, 72 warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy, under the command of Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, lifted anchor. Under complete radio silence, the war fleet, including 6 aircraft carriers, headed into the open sea. Their destination, southeast, the Hawaiian Islands.
The second unanswered communication was one which Secretary Hull placed in the hands of Nomura and Kurusu on November 26th. It explained the conditions under which the United States might be willing to negotiate settlement of the conflict in the Far East.
On November 27th, General Douglas MacArthur was advised by Secretary of War Stimson that negotiations with Japan for all practical purposes were over. It is December 3rd, 1941. Still under radio silence, the Japanese attacking force refuels at sea. They await the final message. Aboard the 6 aircraft carriers, 260 attacking planes. It is December 5th. The Japanese attack force is 900 miles from Pearl Harbor. Now Admiral Nagumo, aboard his flagship, receives the fateful message from Tokyo. Climb Mount Niitaka. Translation, attack, 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 as previously planned. It is 1:22 p.m. New York time. Over Hawaii, the bomb bay doors of the Japanese planes are open. The torpedo planes are ready. Below, 70 combat ships of the United States Pacific Fleet. It is 1:25 p.m. The first bombs have just fallen. At their berths in Pearl Harbor, majestically lined up on Battleship Row, lie the pride of the United States Pacific Fleet. The battleships Arizona, Nevada, Maryland, Tennessee, California, Oklahoma, and West Virginia.
Particular defense measures adopted in the Far East this week by the United States and friendly countries acquire their significance. American Marines have sailed from Shanghai, where large-scale hostilities would have made them hostages. They are now in Manila. In the Philippines, evacuation of Manila is advised. Leaves are canceled at Corregidor, the fortress of Manila. And naval bases lie under permanent blackout. A segment of congressional temper was evident in Representative May's statement that the United States was ready to blast the Japanese off the land and blow them off the water. And in Senator Connolly's remark that if Japan wants war, and if we must have a fight, Japan will find out that we have a Navy in the Pacific that can shoot straight.
It is 2:28 Eastern Standard Time.
It has been the pleasure of the National Broadcasting Company to bring you Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade, featuring his world-famed swing and sway music. The poem read by Sammy Kaye was When We're Apart by Wilson Darren. Today's broadcast has come to you from our studios in Radio City, New York. From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt
said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
Many New Yorkers were listening to the New York Giant Brooklyn Dodger football game.
It's a long one down to around the 3-yard line. Ward Cup takes it. He's cutting up to his left. He's over the 10. Nice block there by Lehman. Cup still going. He's up to the 25. And now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Bruiser Kennard made the tackle. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
Bulletin after bulletin came over the air.
The White House also reported today an simultaneous air attack on Army and Navy bases in Manila. This report followed the President's declaration that all Army and Navy bases on the island of Oahu in Hawaii are now under air attack.
Here is what has happened. President Roosevelt phoned Secretary Early half an hour ago that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States naval base on Oahu Island in the Hawaiian Islands. This means that war is underway between Japan and the United States.
Henry L. Stimson today ordered the entire Army into uniform, effective tomorrow. His order applied to every one of the Army's 1,600,000, including the thousands of officers and men on duty in administrative posts in the War Department building who heretofore have been permitted to wear civilian clothes.
An eyewitness account of the bombing at Manila.
Hello, NBC. This is Bert Salmon speaking from Manila, and this time I've got a real scoop for you. Manila has just been bombed. In fact, right now it is being bombed. And without warning, Japanese bombers started bombing Fort William McKinley, Nichols Airfield, and the RCA transmitting station. At 9 minutes past 3 o'clock, without warning, right now, the moon is shining absolutely full. It's to paint. Stand out like mirrors. And there's no wonder that an enemy bomber would pick out any spot around this part of Manila tonight. It isn't the fault of the blackout. There isn't a light shining any place. But old man Moon just wouldn't stay blacked out.
In Tokyo, the newspaper headlines read, United States Pacific Fleet wiped out. This was one of the few true reports to emanate from Tokyo. The proud battleships were sunk or smashed out of action. 2,343 officers and men were killed, 1,272 injured, nearly 1,000 men missing. Many of them are still entombed today inside the battleship Oklahoma, which stands as a living monument to those who died in the waters of Pearl Harbor. Throughout the day, the reports came in, but none told of the devastation that actually took place. On the evening of December 7th, there was another ironic broadcast. Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president, would make her regular weekly Sunday night report. She would have to change the script that she had prepared earlier in the week.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you tonight at a very serious moment in our history. The cabinet is convening and the leaders in Congress are meeting with the president. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the president all afternoon. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking to the president at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and the Philippines and sinking one of our transports loaded with lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be ready for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action. Many of you all over this country have boys in the services who will now be called upon to go into action. You have friends and families in what has suddenly become a danger zone. You cannot escape anxiety. You cannot escape a clutch of fear at your heart. And yet I hope that the certainty of what we have to meet will make you rise above these fears. We are the free and unconquerable people of the United States of America.
Now more irony. Her guest this Sunday, December 7th, was Corporal James Cannon, a soldier based at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Today, newspaper readers throughout the country know the corporal as Jimmy Cannon, one of America's great sports writers. His columns today reflect his thoughts of more than 2 decades ago. The greatness of the United States fighting man.
How long have you been in the Army, Corporal Cannon?
I've been in 6 months, Mrs. Roosevelt.
You were a selectee?
Yes, Mrs. Roosevelt.
Well, after 6 months of Army life, how do you like it?
I want to tell you, with great sincerity, I am proud to be a bad soldier in this great army of the people.
I don't believe you're such a bad soldier, not with those stripes on your arm, Corporal Cannon.
Honestly, Mrs. Roosevelt, I'm not so hot. But there are good soldiers in my outfit.
Surely there are things which you don't like about the Army.
I don't like heights. My feet tear and blister. I can't like getting up in the dark of the morning. I'm a clumsy chambermaid. My bed always looks like a haystack. But these discomforts are small. I've had a lot of laughs in the 32 years of my life. I'm willing to kick back 1 or 2 years so that I can live the rest of my life with dignity.
What would you suggest to the average civilian as the best way in which they can be helpful to the men in the service?
You'll have to excuse me if I give a pretty strong answer to that question. First, the civilians can cut out those stale jokes and stop that mocking salute too many of them hand a man in uniform. Let them give a soldier the dignity he is entitled to. Tell them to treat a soldier as you would a civilian. Tell them to cut out calling a soldier Sarge. The same guys call a Pullman porter George. We're a civilian army. We're the army of the people. And we want to be treated that way.
That night from Tokyo came the Emperor's declaration of war. Said Emperor Hirohito, "We, by grace of heaven, Emperor of Japan, seated on the throne of a line unbroken for ages eternal, enjoin upon you, our loyal and brave subjects. We hereby declare war on the United States of America and the British Empire." 20 minutes after the Emperor's declaration of war, the Tokyo radio featured a speech by a university professor, ironically titled, "Good Morals." From Berlin, Chancellor Adolf Hitler was ecstatic. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill told a cheering House of Commons that Great Britain was now at war with Japan. Ironically, because of different time zones, the British Empire was formally at war with Japan hours before the United States Declaration. The world waited for Monday, December 8th. Then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would speak before a joint session of the United States Senate and House of Representatives. It would not be necessary to ask the nation to become united in battle. The ranks had already been joined. Perhaps the mood was best expressed by Senator Burton K. Wheeler, the president's major foreign policy opponent. Said Senator Wheeler, "The only thing to do now is to lick hell out of them." There was one humorous note. When asked to be quoted about the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Chinese vice consul replied, "As far as Japan is concerned, their goose is overheated." Sunday, December 7th, the day of the attack on Pearl. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you Climb Mount Niitaka. Translation, Attack Pearl Harbor according to plan. The actual voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic era of the 20th century. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, the day they attacked Pearl.
President Roosevelt's announcement of Japanese air attacks on United States Pacific bases staggered London, according to a dispatch just received. And London now awaits Prime Minister Churchill's promise to declare war on Japan within the hour.
Honolulu. A naval engagement is in progress off Honolulu with at least one black enemy aircraft carrier in action against Pearl Harbor defenses.
At 2:22 p.m. Sunday, December 7th, 1941, radio stations throughout the nation were interrupted. This was the first news bulletin to tell the world that the Japanese Naval and Air Force had attacked the United States naval base of Pearl Harbor. American territory had been bombed by an enemy. The United States would soon be at war. It is September 1940. German bombers are by day and night leveling London. Great Britain fights alone. Through the attacks, the Royal Air Force takes to the skies. They are the last bulwark of defense against the German invasion of the home islands. On September 16, 1940, many in the United States feel that the United States will soon be at war. In Washington, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt picks the first draft number.
Dr. Dykstra, ladies and gentlemen, members of your government are gathered here in this federal building in Washington to witness the drawing of numbers as provided for in the Selective Service Act of 1940. This is a most solemn ceremony. It is accompanied by no fanfare, no blowing of bugles, or beating of drums, and there should be none. We are mustering all our resources, manhood and industry and wealth, to make our nation strong in defense. For recent history proves all too clearly, I am sorry to say, that only the strong may continue to live in freedom and in peace. We are well aware of the circumstances, the tragic circumstances in lands across the sea, which have forced upon our nation the need to take measures of total defense. On October 16th, more than 16 million young Americans registered for service. Today begins that selection from this huge number, the selection of 800,000 who will go into training for 1 year.
Through the year, many young men are drafted into service for the term of 1 year. There is much opposition to the United States participation in foreign wars.
I speak tonight to those people in the United States of America who feel that the destiny of this country does not call for our involvement in European wars. We must band together to prevent the loss of more American lives in these internal struggles of Europe. We must keep foreign propaganda from pushing our country blindly into another war. Modern war, with all its consequences, is too tragic and too devastating to be approached from anything but a purely American standpoint. We should never enter a war unless it is absolutely essential to the future welfare of our nation. This country was colonized by men and women from Europe. They preferred the wilderness and the Indians to the problems of Europe.
On August 18th, 1941, a bill goes before Congress to renew the draft, extending the term of service from 1 year to 30 months. In one of the most dramatic sessions in United States congressional history, the House of Representatives passes the bill by one vote, 203 to 202. The United States will be able to keep its men in the armed forces. Unbeknownst to the country, the single vote ensuring passage is the most important vote ever cast. Pearl Harbor is less than 4 months away. The summer comes. America is still at peace. What was the United States like that summer of 1941? New Chevrolets could be bought for less than $700. Lou Gehrig retired from the New York Yankees, still claiming he'd licked the incurable illness that afflicted him. The invasion of England was no longer expected. Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen were household radio names, and the first of the giveaways, the Pot of Gold, glued millions to their radios. Joe Louis had defended his heavyweight crown against Arturo Godoy, and Mr. Average American was earning $2,000 a year. Richard Rogers had not yet begun his collaboration with Oscar Hammerstein. The musical comedy sensation Oklahoma was still 2 years away. The summer went. Now ominous reports were coming out of the Pacific. Americans who had always expected to eventually be fighting Hitler and Mussolini were now hearing rumblings in the Far East. Japan. Japan, the country with the bamboo roofs. The country that could be set aflame by one small bomb. Japan. The country of little men with ancient ideas. Japan. Unable to conquer China after years of terrible warfare. Japan was making aggressive moves in the Far East. A brief recapitulation. On November 25th, elements of the Japanese Navy quietly moved from their berths in Tonkan Bay in the Kuril Islands of Japan and set sail on a voyage that in less than 2 weeks would climax in the greatest defeat in United States military history, their destination, Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, the United States Pacific Naval Bastion on Oahu Island in the Hawaiian Group. The Hawaiian Islands, 20 islands forming the Hawaiian Group, 7 inhabited, and known as the Wonderland for vacationers throughout the world. The island of Hawaii, Lanai, Maui, Molokai, Kauai, Niihau, and the territory that houses the capital of Honolulu, the island of Oahu. Oahu, the home of Waikiki Beach, Cocoa Head and Diamond Head, legendary places for romance seekers since the year 1778, when Captain James Cook happened upon them. Oahu, the home of the American naval base of Pearl Harbor since 1900, when the United States annexed the island. In the middle of Pearl Harbor, another small island, Ford Island. In Pearl Harbor, 96 ships of the United States Pacific Fleet. At their berths in Ford Island in Pearl Harbor, the battleships of the American fleet. Battle wagons, traditionally named after states of the United States. Massive but silent in the dawn hours of December 7th. The names Arizona, Nevada, Tennessee, West Virginia, Maryland, Oklahoma, and California. It is 7:55 a.m. Sunday, December 7th, Hawaiian time. The bomb bay doors are open. Pearl Harbor is being attacked by planes of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Shortly after the attack, radio stations throughout the United States interrupted their programs.
It's a long one down to around the 3-yard line. Ward Cup takes it. He's cutting up to his left. He's over the 10. Nice block there by Lehman. Cup still going. He's up to the 25. And now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Bruiser Kennard made the tackle.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
As the nation awaited the president's message of war, Prime Minister Winston Churchill spoke to the Empire.
This is London. Listeners are now to hear the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Winston Churchill. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Churchill.
You will remember, when we think of the insane ambition and insatiable appetites which have caused this vast, melancholy extension of the war, we can only feel that Hitler's madness has infected the Japanese minds, and that the root of the evil and its branch must be extirpated together. And as I told the House of Commons this afternoon, in the past, we had a light which flickered. In the present, we have a light which flames. And in the future, there will be a light which will shine calm and resplendent over all the land and all the sea.
Back in the United States, there was nervousness and fear amongst the populace. The drone of the airplane engine sent eyes looking skyward, and men, women, and children remembered well the slaughter at Rotterdam, London, Coventry, and just yesterday at Pearl. New York's Mayor Fiorello H. LaGuardia, head of National Civilian Defense, spoke to the people.
Now, in the event of an air raid, and let me warn you all again that distance is no protection, that we who live on the Atlantic coast are just as much in danger of being bombed as our countrymen who were bombed last night in Honolulu. So here are some of the fundamental rules to remember. Don't listen to rumors. Don't follow any excited person who may be screaming. He may be trying to create a panic. Keep off the streets during a raid. If you're more than 5 minutes from home when an air raid comes, lie down under shelter. Otherwise, go home and stay there. Put out the lights if the planes come over. The lights that are out will never guide a Jap or any other bomber. Cooperate with your air raid wardens. He is your friend. He will help you. Don't be a wise guy and get hurt. We can lick the Japs if everybody does his part, but we are not afraid, and we are confident that we are going to beat the Japs so badly that they will never attempt such a dastardly act as they committed yesterday for the next 300 years.
It is Monday, December 8th, 1941. The place, Washington, D.C. The situation, President Roosevelt is about to speak to a joint session of Congress. He enters the Great Hall on the arm of his son James, a captain in the Marine Corps. There is wild cheering, rebel yells, Enthusiastic applause from both sides of the chamber. The president is in formal morning attire. In the more than 2 decades since the speech, it has rarely been heard in its entirety. Yet it took the president less than 6 minutes to ask Congress to declare war against the Empire of Japan. Here, then, is the entire speech.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And prior that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. During the intervening time, the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expressions of hope for continued peace between San Francisco and Honolulu. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. It is September 2nd, 1945. President Roosevelt is dead. He is one of almost 300,000 American battle deaths. Aboard the Missouri, there is a dramatic remembrance of the past. From the foremast flies an American flag. It is the same flag that flew atop the Capitol in Washington on December 7th, 1941. December 7th, 1941, the day of the attack on Pearl. There is an epitaph. It was spoken by General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff, United States Army. Said General Marshall,
It is impossible for the nation to compensate for the services of a fighting man. There is no pay scale high enough to buy the services of a single soldier for even a few minutes of the agony of combat or the physical miseries of the campaign. To him, the nation owes eternal debt. The Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.